Today we're going global on Gulf Streams, talking with two conservation experts who are working to preserve tropical spaces around the world. In this conversation, they're sharing their work, why it matters, but especially what conservation, both across the globe and here at home, can learn from pioneering projects abroad. I'm Weston Twardowski, the Associate Director of Rice's Center for Environmental Studies and Associate Director of Eco Studio in Rice's Sustainability Institute, and you're listening to Gulf Streams on KPFT Houston 90.1 FM, Galveston 89.5 FM, and Huntsville 89.7 FM, where we talk with leading experts and community leaders to better understand the environmental problems and potential solutions facing our community. A quick reminder that you can catch up on Gulf Streams anytime through our podcast, available on all major podcast platforms. If you enjoy the show, please like and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. First up today, we're talking with Dr. Rakan Zahawi, who is the executive director of the Charles Darwin Foundation, which works doing conservation efforts all across the Galapagos Islands. Dr. Rakan Zahawi, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to get to talk to you both about the Charles Darwin Foundation broadly, which is celebrating an exciting anniversary this year. But also, I mean, you are a trained scientist. You are someone who thinks really deeply about biodiversity and someone who's really invested in the Galapagos, not just for the Galapagos sake, but really as a site that we can understand how important biodiversity and conservation is globally. And I think that's a really important and kind of leading role that the Galapagos and CDF in particular, Charles Darwin Foundation, kind of run. So can you just tell us a little bit, maybe to start, just a little about yourself and how you first came into the kind of science and work that you do?
Sure. So I'm a tropical biologist by training. I've worked in Latin America my whole career. I did all my graduate work in Central America, and it's all been focused on looking at ways to accelerate forest recovery in degraded habitats. And I came across it sort of by accident. I did my undergraduate work in Texas. And I started traveling after finishing my undergraduate degree in Mexico and Central America. And I just was completely amazed, as you say, by the biodiversity and the complexity and the intricacies of these tropical systems. And as I got more engaged and more involved with this, one thing led to another. And I decided to go to graduate school and pursue this as a career.
When was the first time you actually went to the Galapagos?
Well, a few months before I took the job. So I'd never actually, as you alluded, Galapagos has this sort of image, and it resonates like no other place, arguably on Earth, especially for biologists. And so the opportunity to potentially work here was really interesting to me. But this position opened up in the middle of the pandemic, and
Mm.
so I tossed in an application and so we worked out a crazy arrangement for me to go from Hawaii all the way to Galapagos and back again in 9 days, with about 3 days on the ground. And that's all it took. I came here and I was just completely amazed of the little I saw of Galapagos, and then of course of the foundation itself. And I went back thinking, I can't pass this up. And so that's sort of when I started, making the next steps for moving here.
So I think most folks are probably vaguely familiar, have kind of a third or fifth grade science level memory of, okay, Charles Darwin goes to Galapagos, studies it, forms a lot of his ideas, hence Charles Darwin Foundation has such strong ties there, of course, right? I'm curious though if you can tell us a little more about what makes the Galapagos so unique and special, because it is a really remarkable place for a variety of reasons. But in terms of why Darwin was able to study the way that he was, why people are still so interested in studying this place today, can you explain a little bit why it is a uniquely important site?
One thing to mention first off is is that Galapagos is not biodiversity rich. So it's a small, relatively small archipelago, about 8,000 square kilometers. To give you a bit of perspective, Hawaii is about 25,000 square kilometers. So, you know, it's about a third the size of Hawaii and maybe about half the number of native species. But what it lacks in the number of species, it makes up for in just the sheer uniqueness
Mm.
and oddities that you have here. Same with Hawaii. So insular systems, isolated islands in oceans, oceanic space are often house many really unique species that are found nowhere else on Earth. Galapagos in particular is really weird because it sits on the equator and it's at the confluence of major oceanic currents. So we actually have a very variable climate seasonality here. And sometimes it's rather cold, other times it's what you would expect of a tropical island on the equator, and hot and sticky. And this mix of cold oceanic currents and upwelling coming from deep ocean currents produces a confluence that makes it such that you have species that are, you have tropical fish mixed with penguins, you have really unique assemblages of species that just doesn't happen anywhere else
Mm.
in the world. And that, I think, is part of what makes Galapagos so special. On top of that, you just have some species that have evolved very weird features. So cormorants are a group of birds, marine birds that you find all over the world. Galapagos, the species here evolved and became flightless. They don't, you know, they don't have any natural predators here, and they evolved over a relatively short span of time to lose the ability to fly, but they've become instead expert divers in Galapagos. Iguanas, you have marine iguanas here, the only species in the world of iguana that evolved to feed in the intertidal space in Galapagos. It's a very bizarre species. It kind of looks like a mini Godzilla. Um, and so you have these really unique features that you come here, and when you see them, it's just incredibly weird.
Mm.
Uh, and the last thing I'd say is that that is also what really strikes people when they come here is how docile species are, how they're completely unfazed by humans, and that innocence is because they don't see humans as a threat, whereas pretty much anywhere else in the world, humans have spent, you know, hundreds or thousands of years uh, uh, hunting, eliminating unwanted species, and so on. And so, you know, animals are very wary of humans, and that's not the case in Galapagos, which is a really unique experience for humans.
Mm. I mean, that's fascinating because it's making me think about things that one of the things we've talked about a lot on the program before is that Houston is actually a surprisingly biodiverse place. It's frequently a kind of biodiversity hotspot in the US. And we have the exact opposite scenario where we have, you know, mass interference with kind of human engagement with the natural environment, with the species around us, and this really bizarre, like many urban places are, kind of commingling that creates this entirely new ecosystem of urban human with, you know, all of the kind of natural plants and animals that we might think of. And so, I mean, in listening to you, it's one of these fascinating things where we think of very much biodiversity as a strength, but also in hearing you talk around the Galapagos, which you're saying, you know, it's not actually that we have these, you know, just ridiculous numbers of kind of different species, but that ability to learn and study really unique ecosystems and ecosystems that are largely divorced from human engagement, which is where so much of Darwin's work really came from, was those early kind of discoveries around this is an ecosystem where I can observe that hasn't, you know, had massive kind of European style urbanization and engagement. And so I'm really curious about, you know, some of what that research can show us or can open up for us? And I mean, you especially as a researcher, what are some of the things that you think are that excite you about Galapagos discoveries or things that we're learning about now that you think are really you want to herald for listeners outside of the area?
Um, well, two things. So traditionally, of course, Galapagos is known for helping Charles Darwin develop his theory of evolution, right?
That's the
And
big one.
that's the big one. That's the big ticket. And the reason for that is many of these different assemblages that came to Galapagos, whether you're talking about groups of plants such as the genus Scalacea, which is an endemic genus to Galapagos that had adaptive radiation, so one common ancestor, and many species evolved to fit different niches in the islands, or whether you're talking about the mockingbirds that are the basis of Darwin's theory that evolved into five species um, in across the islands, or the finches. Uh,
Mm,
Darwin's finches, even though that's not really what he focused on in his work, they're named after him collectively. And you have 15 or so species, depending on how you cut it, evolving from a common ancestor. And so evolution's really one of the key. The Galapagos lends itself to study that, and you
mm,
can see that in real time in the sense of some of the really seminal work that's been done here by Peter and Rosemary Grant, studying finches over 30 years, and being able to demonstrate how populations shifted in terms of their phenotypic traits over a few generations. So that's really the core aspect of it. Of course, the novelties of the unique species are really an interesting thing to study as well. Um, what attracts me in particular is a sharp contrast to exactly what you talked about. So Galapagos, unlike most other systems in the world, is actually still pretty intact. Um, Again, I can do a comparison with Hawaii. Hawaii is often referred to as the extinction capital of the world
mm,
because so many species have been lost there. I mean, it had a huge number of unique species that were lost before we knew what was what it meant to introduce species into these
mm.
systems and what impact they could have. So you've lost more than 300 species that are native to Hawaii. In contrast, Galapagos, it's in the double digits, 10 to 15 species. Uh, so almost all the ingredients that were here when Darwin visited are still here today, and 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 so that's an incredible asset. Uh, Alongside that are also many trends and patterns in terms of habitat degradation and loss and species declines going on in Galapagos that you see everywhere else in the world.
Mm.
And so me coming at this from a restoration perspective and a conservation biologist are really interested in, you've still got that suite of species out there. What can we do to prevent the same pattern from unfolding as what happened in Hawaii or many other parts of the world?
CDF is up to and some of the role that you have in the Galapagos?
Sure, sure. I mean, so where a foundation was established at the same time as the national park, 1959. We are an independent organization registered in Belgium, and we do the science that helps inform better conservation practice for Galapagos, with the national park overseeing the management and use, if you will, of the land mass and the Galapagos Marine Reserve.
Mm.
And so we do this most of the science. Originally, we were the only gig in town, and so we did all of that work for the national park. But now there are many other actors here, scientists coming in and doing work, other NGOs that are established here as well. Um, but we have about 25 different lines of research, both in the terrestrial and marine realm. Most of it has an applied research focus with a conservation sort of application. But we also do basic work. We do exploration. There's still a lot to discover, especially in the marine realm of Galapagos, but even in terrestrial. I mean, new potential species of birds and other critters pop up periodically. It's kind of an interesting. It's amazing to think with so much history that you still have undiscovered species here. So that's a big part of what we of our role in Galapagos. But then also applying this. So it's not sufficient to just say, here's the answer to addressing the Philornis, the housefly, the avian vampire fly problem. We also try and raise the funds in order to help with the implementation of our best conservation practice. Of course, in line with the national park, that's the ultimate authority on what does and doesn't get done here.
So can you talk a little bit about what some of those restoration efforts look like? And I think this is really particularly interesting because it's something that conservationists are deploying across the globe. You can look at almost any conservation site and there's going to be some kind of restoration effort. And I think we've had in the last few weeks some other local conservation actors on. And I mean, one of the things that I think these urban environments are engaging with that's really different and interesting from somewhere like Galapagos, where you have a very, different kind of ecology you can engage with, is here we're trying to think of like adaptive environments, and that there are certain invasive species that we're like, okay, we really have to get this under control. There's other ones that we're just like, we're never gonna tackle this problem. And so how do we either get it under control, how do we try to address that in different ways? And so I think folks often imagine environments as kind of stagnant places and kind of like finished in a way. And I think especially for folks in Houston, where we are, where it's easy to imagine just the concrete jungle, and it's there's the number of Houstonians who I hear and who local folks are we're not just concrete. This is a biodiverse, nature-rich place, but it does look and feel different, and it's still very much changing. And so it's in some ways fascinating for me to talk to you and think about, what does it mean to be somewhere where you really can confront things that have been recent additions in a very different way, but also just to hear that even in places that we perhaps imagine as some of the best examples of the static environment, if you would, is changing and alive and discovering and responding to new threats. So yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit just about what some of those restoration projects look like, and especially if there are ways that you see those being deployed, not just in Galapagos, but some of the research that you're doing being applied all over the world.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the most exciting aspects of the work that we do here. From the very beginning, when I came and visited for those few days before taking the job, you could tell that there's some really you're really pushing the envelope here in terms of some of the ambition and ideas of what you can do on the ground. And so, like I said at the beginning, we have all the ingredients here. It's a matter of how do you return that balance. And I would say that none of these systems are ever static. Even degraded systems are always adapting and evolving. So what can we do in terms of interventions to help move that needle back in a direction or in a that we want, in terms of having a system that reflects what Galapagos is in all of our imagination. And perhaps a really good example to take would be the Floriana Restoration Project, which is a very ambitious project with a number of other collaborators, other institutions involved: Hokotoko Island Conservation, National Park, ourselves, and many other actors, to apply a holistic restoration approach to the island. So I mentioned 2 invasive species. There are many others. Rodents were non-native. There are native rodents to Galapagos, but non-natives have been introduced, and certainly on the islands that are inhabited, cats, dogs, donkeys, etc. So there's also non-native fauna that are wreaking havoc. So it was a 10-year initiative to build up the funding and the framework to do eradication of cats and rodents on Floriana Island. And then what we're leading a lot of the work on for that island is reintroduction of species that have been locally lost there, that have been extirpated, about a
Mm.
dozen species. Most of them we're doing the work on most of that. And then also the habitat restoration. So what I talked about with blackberry being an invasive species, it disrupts the natural sort of life cycle of native flora, and over time swallows up habitat and turns it into basically, massive thickets of blackberry. And we've done all the work to sort of understand what do you need to do to get the native vegetation to come back. And the answer is fairly simple. You just clear it out.
Mm.
But of course, if you just clear out a small patch and then let it go, the blackberry just comes straight back in. So what we have here in in contrast to other places in the world is an island, right? So you're actually limited by ocean. So if you think about this at a whole island scale and start saying, well, we're probably not going to eradicate blackberries entirely, but if we reduce the coverage of blackberries throughout the island to such an extent that you only have tiny little patches, then you can manage it over time. You have to, of course, deplete the seed bank and everything else. So it's a long-term projection, but that's where we're going in terms of thinking about restoration island-wide, and thinking about it from all these different facets. Because you just remove goats or rodents from an island, and you'll have an immediate reaction because these systems are always changing in with respect to sort of different pressures and so on. And so you have to think about it from all these different aspects. And I'll just say one other last comment on that. I mean, an initial eradication was done in 2023 on Floriana Island. And in early 2024, or was it this year? Now I can't remember. Anyway, it's irrelevant. The Galapagos rail, which is a land bird that's mostly found on the ground, was rediscovered on Floriana
Oh, wow.
2 centuries after it was last reported. The last person
Wow.
who reported the Galapagos rail on Floriana was Charles Darwin. And within a year of this eradication program, there was, the call was recorded, and then it was later cited. And it just goes to show how resilient these systems are. So obviously, well, in my mind anyway, the bird was always present there, but in very small numbers, and its behavior had changed dramatically just because of threats of predation. But you have that release, and poof, suddenly this bird starts reappearing not just once, but multiple times in the island. And this after extensive searches for it over the last 20, 30, 40 years to sort of say, is it really gone? Is it not gone? Et cetera. So it's really kind of amazing to see how systems can quickly bounce back when you remove a stressor.
Now that's fascinating. And I mean, and how exciting to see something that hasn't been seen since Darwin. I I have one last question for you, and then we're going to have to wrap up because we're coming to the end of our time. But I want to ask about, and this is a little bit, I think for Houstonians, I want to shout out, the easiest way for them to experience a hint of the Galapagos is to go down to the Houston Zoo, which opened a large Galapagos exhibit about a year ago now, that I think you guys have done some work with them on as well. But something that, I mean, you're expanding your physical campus, which is exciting, just as a to have a bigger footprint and space and research facility. But part of that is very much targeted to visitors and is very much thinking about going into the foundation and learning about these various animals and plants and the Galapagos as a whole. And that's this kind of interesting eco-tourist piece. And we've talked about that a little bit in the past, but I'm curious if you want to say anything about, especially somewhere that I think we do imagine as this kind of pristine landscape, and we've deconstructed that a little bit. But I mean, I think for folks who imagine Galapagos as getting to be somewhere that is this remarkable space that is untouched by humans, tourism is not maybe the first thing you would think of for folks who want to visit or who are visiting, but it's a huge part of what's actually sustaining Galapagos now and a huge part of economics around the area. So can you talk a little bit about what how you view ecotourism as fitting into this and being able to bring people there, but also to educate them on what these spaces mean today and those opportunities to perhaps make conservation of us all as we travel around the world?
Absolutely. I think that's a great question, and I think you sort of hinted at this at the beginning of our conversation. Um, Galapagos is a beacon, right? It's got this name brand that you don't have anywhere else in the world, and it has that for a reason that we touched on. Um, that gives it this incredible role in conservation. That it in of itself stands as basically a representation of, if we can get things right in Galapagos, you can take that message and you can apply the knowledge learned, and you can inspire people to do it elsewhere. And so Galapagos turns into sort of basically a laboratory of what do we need to do to get it right. And I should say as well, so that listeners don't think get a misrepresentation here, Galapagos is still one of the best preserved places on Earth. It really is. And when you come and visit here, it's outstanding. I mean, the volume of biomass and species and individuals that you see all over the place, everywhere you go, is really you just don't see that anywhere else in the world. So tourism plays a really fundamental role in this, in the sense that you're hopefully creating ambassadors for conservation who come here and see this and are just amazed. What it always makes me think, especially when I'm underwater and I'm diving, and you just see just thousands of fish and just the sheer biomass, and you think this was what a lot of the world was like back then. And so it makes you really sort of think, it's profound, the sensation you have when you're here. So I think it's really important because it creates ambassadors. Because of its name recognition, it also attracts very wealthy people. And so those people can then turn into supporters, and philanthropy is a huge piece of key, from tourism is a big piece of what drives conservation here. And certainly the cruise-based tourism is extremely well regulated in Galapagos, and the park does an outstanding job of minimizing exposure of groups. So it's 80, 100 cruise boats, and these are small cruises, right? Anywhere from 15, 16 passengers to maximum 100. There's no bigger boat than that. You can't have more than 100 guests on a cruise ship in Galapagos. They're all playing musical chairs in the archipelago. So I don't know off the top of my head what the number of sites are, but it's 80, 100, let's say, something like that. And all these boats are moving around and playing sort of musical chairs, in terms of they go to this site in the morning and then this site in the afternoon. The other boat does the reverse. You have naturalists on every single one of these cruises who are very well trained and know enormous about the research and work in Galapagos and conservation and just natural history. And so they're guiding all these trips. And then they're very clearly demarcated trails and guidelines as to what you can and can't do, both on land and when you're snorkeling in the water. And these cruises expose you to many of the uninhabited islands. So there's 4 inhabited islands in Galapagos. The rest are uninhabited. There's 18 or so major islands, and these cruise ships go to most of them. And so you're exposed to this environment. I mean, where you're on an island that there are no humans on, and there's just critters everywhere, and you're walking around, and it really blows your mind away. And so getting them to be stewards and ambassadors, and of course those who can afford it, be supporters, is really important. And I would like to say a last word about the Houston Zoo as well, because
Please do.
we were invited to the opening. And I remember when I first went, while they were building the exhibit, feeling a bit nervous about, what's this going to look like? And when it was completed and we went, I mean, it's really a remarkable exhibit. And I don't say that just because this is a Houston audience. I say that because I think the zoo managed to capture the feeling of what visiting Galapagos is like. Now, to the trained eye, so somebody who works in Galapagos, everything looks a bit odd. So, instead of Galapagos sea lions, you've got California sea lions. So they don't look quite the same. And you look at them, you're like, well, that doesn't look right. The penguins are way too big for Galapagos because they're Humboldt penguins. But the mixture that they did, and they brought all these animals together and created this space where you go from one room to the next, and suddenly you see penguins and you see sea lions. That's what Galapagos is like. And so they captured that beautifully. Of course, there are some species that are from Galapagos, like the giant tortoises that are wandering around there. So it's really a great exhibit, and it's a great way to get a sense of what Galapagos would be like if you are thinking of planning a trip, and you can get a teaser by going to the Houston Zoo beforehand. And if you can't afford to come to Galapagos, the Houston Zoo is certainly a great alternative.
Well, hopefully that has whetted folks' appetites for a little more Galapagos in their time.
Yeah, I hope so.
Dr. Rikan Zawi, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us about Galapagos, about Charles Darwin Foundation, and all the work that you're doing. It's been a joy catching up with you.
Thank you, Weston, and thank you for the invitation.
And now our co-host Cheney has a piece all on tropical restoration in a different part of the world.
Next up, we have Bryn Ram, who is the Project Communications Manager for Island Conservation, whose mission is to restore islands for nature and people worldwide. They are a United States-based 501c3 charitable organization that collaborates with local communities, government management agencies, and conservation organizations to holistically restore islands by bringing back biodiversity, the foundation of all healthy ecosystems. Bryn is here to talk with us about their work with island conservation and share a recent success story. So, Bryn, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, Cheney. I'm so glad to be here. So I am Island Conservation's Projects Communications Manager, which means my job involves getting stories from our staff that are out in the field, getting photos, and telling those stories to other folks. This also involves going to some of these projects and being part of the restoration efforts, helping with community liaising and various other things to make sure that the amazing work that we do gets out into the world.
Okay. And then, I gave the little spiel at the beginning about what island conservation's primary goals are, but what are some of the other things that island conservation is up to? Give me the big picture, sky level view.
Island Conservation started out, it's a 30-year-old organization. We just had our 30th birthday. It started out with these, thank you. It started out with two scientists who were restoring an island off the coast of California. And they noticed that it was possible to see absolutely immense recovery on islands specifically because of their unique geography. So they have a lot of endemic species because things can evolve specifically on islands without competition from the mainland. And also conservation interventions that happen on islands can be contained. So there's not as many variables as there would be conserving the mainland. So ever since then, Island Conservation has slowly been growing from this tiny office in Santa Clara to a global organization with staff all over the world working to restore islands in Latin America, in North America, in the Pacific, sort of all over the planet. And we have also learned that over the course of restoring an island, all of the surrounding ecosystems also benefit. So when you help holistically restore an island, by bringing back species that were missing, helping remove invasive species, the whole ecosystem can bounce back and those nutrients flow into the surrounding waters. So coral reefs, kelp forests, seagrass beds, all of these things can grow faster, be more resilient to things like climate change and ocean acidification and global warming and stuff. But then also you have human beings who depend on our ocean and our islands around the world for food, for their livelihood. So we have begun to understand ourselves less as we have begun to understand. Hold on, let me restart that. We've begun to understand ourselves as an organization that does work that benefits nature and oceans and people, not just islands.
Mm-hmm. Hence your tagline, nature, oceans, people.
Yeah, brand new.
Brand new. How brand new?
Like a year.
Okay, cool. Interesting rebranding.
Mm-hmm. It used to be We Prevent Extinctions, which we also do.
First, I want to talk about some very good news that y'all got on a recent project that you were involved with. So can you tell us the story of that project and then what the results were?
Yes. So this is a really exciting project. It was a project to restore two different sites in the Republic of the Marshall Islands, which is a super small island nation in the North Pacific. It's a very low-lying nation. The maximum elevation in the entire country is 7 meters. It's all made out of coral. So it's very susceptible to erosion, to sea level rise, and of course to other impacts like fishing and invasive species. So we went out on a project to restore two different sites. There's Gimo Islet, which is a sort of standalone island that acts as a gardening island for a variety of communities that are nearby. So they'll go and harvest crabs and pandanus, which is a crop that's similar to breadfruit. And fish in the nearby waters. And then further out, there is Bikar Atoll, which is a ring of coral islands. That there's 3 different islands there that we've restored. So this was the first project that I was lucky enough to go. I was able to be a part of this. I traveled to the Marshall Islands last summer and helped implement some of the conservation interventions there. We were focusing on invasive species because when you remove an invasive species, that's sort of like when you remove an invasive species, you repair damage in the links of nutrient flow throughout the entire ecosystem. So it can sort of bounce back all on its own. It was a really exciting operation. We used heavy lift drones, which is like brand new emerging technology, very cutting edge stuff.
Can I ask what are those exactly?
Really large drones. They're like the size of a car.
Whoa.
And we flew them off of a boat and then also off of the beach on Bikar. And they were able to get like coverage of an entire island. Whereas, you know, the other options are helicopters, which you can't bring a helicopter out to an island that's that remote. It was like a 3-day boat journey from the capital, which is Majuro. And then the other option is like a plane. And then the other option is doing it by hand. We went out there, some of the most remote islands in the world. I got to see these incredible, incredible places. And when I was there, I was like, this is amazing. It's so beautiful. There's so many birds. After 1 year, our team returned to the Marshall Islands to figure out if we had been successful in removing invasive rodents, and then also to monitor any early signs of recovery. As you know, like, things in the environment don't usually happen very quickly. It's a slow process. However, from the second our project manager stepped foot on Gimo, which was his first stop, you could immediately tell there was a difference. You could hear the difference. There were bird calls, like the island was dense with birds, just filling the sky. They were all over the trees. And then all over the ground were tree seedlings. So Pisonia grandis is the main like foresting tree that grows on these islands. And while we were there, you know, we had this 1 by 1 meter plot that we would drop down on the ground at different locations and count how many seedlings were growing in that location. And when we were doing it, when I was there, like, we would just throw it down on a bare patch of dirt and be like, count the seedlings. 0. Okay, next. And then we would trek to the next location and throw it down, and there wouldn't be any seedlings. This time, over 60 1 by 1 meter plots, they counted thousands of these seedlings, and the photos are just incredible. What was once bare earth is now completely carpeted with these tiny, tiny green seedlings that are just starting to grow. Like, the kind of recovery that you couldn't even imagine. Another thing that was incredible was this giant colony of sooty terns. So that's a ground nesting species. They lay their eggs on the ground, which means they're very, very vulnerable to invasive species. And there was not a nesting colony when we were there last, but this time there was like a 2,000 strong nesting colony of sooty terns, and they were raising these tiny babies that were just running all over the rocks, these like fluffy little baby birds. Just like growing up safely and happily all over these islands. So it's just kind of completely astonishing transformation and recovery of an ecosystem in just 1 year. So we can't wait to see what's coming next. And the other thing that's really exciting is that BCAR is part of a new marine protected area that the Republic of the Marshall Islands established in January of this year, which means there will be permanent safeguarding of the benefits to coral reefs and the near-shore ecosystems. There's some really, really rare corals out there, and a lot of people depend on the fish populations for their livelihood. So it's just kind of a cascade of really, really wonderful impacts.
And you mentioned, so invasive species. What kind of invasive species were on this island?
This Gimo and BCAR they had invasive rats.
Invasive rats. And how did these rats get there?
They were brought on boats. So, you know, stowaways on ships.
So you mentioned also that there was like a gardening island that was part of this community. So I'm really curious. Part of y'all's mission is to serve both nature and people. And I think that we've heard a little bit more about the nature part, but there's this gardening island, and I'm thinking that might have to do with the people. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So Likiep Atoll is an atoll that's very nearby to Gimo, and they are the traditional stewards of that land. When we were there, we got to, you know, hang out on this island in this village a lot and, you know, talk to the community and hear all these amazing stories about how they used to be able to go to Gimo and plant things like pumpkins and then harvest them later. Pandanus is an incredibly important crop in the Marshall Islands. It keeps really well. You can travel with it. You can cook with it. You can make juice with it. You can make whiskey from it, which is delicious. And they would harvest it from the wild. They would also harvest coconut crabs on Gimo. That's a really, really important source of protein for folks. And then, of course, the nearshore ecosystem is just absolutely teeming with fish. So they would fish there. But they shared that in recent decades, there just wasn't possible for them to spend the night on Gimo because there were too many invasive species. They would get in your tent, they would get in your sleeping bag, they would eat all your food, and they couldn't plant anything because they ate all the seedlings. So nothing was able to grow, and then and if you gathered food there, the likelihood that it was carrying, a rat-borne illness was higher.
Right.
So what we can expect now that the island is safe for human use again, we were able to share that news with the village on Likiep, and that was really, really exciting that now they get to perform the traditional stewardship that is their right, that they've been doing for generations, and now it's safe to do that again.
Mm-hmm. How has y'all's work facilitated this?
Yeah, so all of the projects that Island Conservation undertakes are at the request of the stewards of the islands. So this was a case where we had a little bit of success in some different islands in Majuro, and then the folks in this community saw that success and were able to reach out to us and ask if we could help restore Jimo and Bikar. And we were. So that was great. This project involved a lot of local help. So we had folks from the village and folks from RMI's government with us helping with these different projects. And we did a lot of biosecurity training. Biosecurity measures help stop species from going to places where they shouldn't be. So, for example, when you're on a plane and you're going to New Zealand or something and they ask you if you have any seeds or something in your bag, that's biosecurity. So we taught the community about how to make sure that your boat is free of rats and free of seeds before you go onto these different islands. They have no invasive plants, which is kind of astonishing and really, really rare. There's some of the most, I didn't even say this, Bikar and Bokak, which is the Bikar Atoll, is one of the only examples left on Earth of a pristine, semi-arid coral atoll ecosystem that's completely unaltered by human habitation. There has not been permanent human settlement on Bikar ever.
Wow.
So it is this completely primordial landscape. It's very stark. It's very hot. It's very dense. It's just this absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous place. And now that we've restored some of the nutrient pathways, you can, see what these islands were evolved to do, what the species on these islands were evolved to do. So the thing about the project in the Republic of the Marshall Islands is that the places that we went were uninhabited. We do a lot of other projects in locations that do have human people. We do a lot of projects in other locations that do have human communities, and the collaboration there that we are seeing, listening and learning from these indigenous stewards and learning more about traditional use of these lands. There are a couple of projects in Palau where, we're able to help restore these ancient sites of cultural heritage that have ancient cave carvings or artifacts or things like that.
So, the fact that y'all do this work with nature and people, and how that's played out specifically to such great success at this one location. Have y'all had success at other locations and in other projects? And if so, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, we actually, Island Conservation over our 30 years of work has a 90% success rate.
Wow. That feels high to me.
It's extremely high. In the world of environmental conservation, you can sort of expect a 40 to 50% success rate. But islands are really, really special. Not only can you perform targeted interventions that cost comparatively less, but you can see the impacts of those interventions not just more quickly, but also over a longer period of time, because you're more likely to have those impacts safeguarded with robust biosecurity measures and things like that.
Right.
So another location that we have worked in a lot is the Galapagos in Ecuador. We've been working there for decades. We had a project to remove invasive species from 2 islands, Rabida and Pinzon. Those are some really, really exciting locations because we were able to find species that once were thought extinct. So there's a leaf-toed gecko on Rabida that was only known on the island by subfossil records that were 5,000 years old.
That's crazy.
And then once we saw the island start to recover, we saw these geckos running around, and we were able to confirm that not only is it the same species of gecko that had never been seen on the island before in living memory, but also that they're like a genetically distinct, evolutionarily significant unit of this species, which requires extra protection. Similarly, the Galapagos is obviously famous for its amazing tortoises.
Yes.
So there are a lot of situations where tortoises are really, really important ecosystem engineers. They can transform. They manage the vegetation really well. They dig. They do all sorts of things that are really, really important, and nothing can fill that niche like a tortoise. But the problem is they lay eggs that in the ground, which are very, very susceptible to predation by invasive species. So
Such as rats.
So on Pinzon, for example, there were only adult tortoises. They could not get baby tortoises to grow up because they were just too small. And because, tortoises live a really long time, so there's just a bunch of really large, really old tortoises on this island. And they were actually considered extinct in the wild because they weren't breeding. However, our restoration project allowed for baby Pinzon tortoises to hatch and emerge from their nests on that island for the first time in decades. One of my favorite videos of all time, my colleague took watching a little baby tortoise crawl out of the dirt and emerge into the sun. Very, very cute. And now the International Union for the Conservation of Nature has downlisted the species from extinct in the wild to vulnerable.
Which is a pretty big jump.
It's a huge jump. It jumped over like 4 different classes.
Wow. That's pretty
exciting.
crazy. And so what's up next for the turtles? Or for all of these projects, really? I guess that's what's up next for these projects?
Island Conservation has a very, very full roster coming into the end of 2025 and getting ready for 2026. So we have another project in the Galapagos that's going on the island of Floriana. This is the largest conservation project ever undertaken in the Galapagos in its entire history. And we are looking forward to reintroducing a couple of extirpated species. So the Floriana giant tortoise is set to return to Floriana early next year. This is really, really exciting. That is a species that was completely extinct on the island, but on a nearby island, they found a bunch of tortoises that had a lot of genetic similarities to the Floriana giant tortoise because sailors took the Floriana tortoise from Floriana, brought it to this other island, and it bred with these other tortoises. So through a really specific captured breeding program, they were able to, help breed a bunch of individuals that are extremely genetically similar to the extinct Floriana giant tortoise. And now that those tortoises are big enough to live on their own, we're getting ready to bring them back to Floriana for the first time in hundreds of years.
That's pretty cool. That's a great success story.
If it works.
If it works. It sounds like, you'll have a 90% success rate. So odds
so it'll
are
be
in
pretty
your
good.
favor, I think.
We've got some really exciting ones coming up. We have a project in the U.S. Virgin Islands, reintroducing the U.S. Virgin Islands tree boa, which is an endangered species. Really, really cool. Unfortunately,
Boa like snake?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
It's really cool. It's like a really, really, really cool species, actually. It's like a bug-eating snake.
Oh.
It's really neat. So, but unfortunately, that project has been affected by funding cuts in the United States because it's a U.S. territory. Our projects that are not in U.S. territories are just chugging along. So in Palau, we have a new one coming up in Sonsoral State, which is a state in Palau that serves a distinct ethnic group, and we're working on 3 islands there, and 2 of them used to be inhabited but are now no longer inhabited because invasive species were just taking over, and so everyone had to move off of the island in the 90s. We're hoping that as part of this project we can restore the islands to a point where people can return to their ancestral homes. We have a project on Great Sitkin in Alaska. This is a huge Aleutian volcano. Really, really exciting.
Can you explain what an Aleutian volcano is to the audience and me?
So the Aleutian Islands are just like that one part of Alaska that the
Yeah.
bottom part that's just a big string of
The
islands.
tail,
Those
yeah.
are the Aleutians.
Okay.
And it is a volcano.
Okay.
It's really huge, a really, really big volcano in Great Sitkin, a really important site for bald eagles. A lot of salmon breed there. It's like a pretty important location, especially for the indigenous people that live up there. We've had a lot of success in Aleutian Islands in the past. There was actually an island that used to be called Rat Island.
Yikes.
But once we helped remove the invasive species from there, the indigenous people were able to petition the government to change its name back to its indigenous name, which
Oh,
is
cool.
Hawada Island.
Okay. Very nice. So that's the nature people working together thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's another one.
Yeah.
I like that story.
That's a good one. Yeah. I have one more question, which is to bring it into the context of the Gulf Coast, as many of our listeners are indeed from the Gulf Coast. So, what are some ways that we can think about y'all's work in the context of this region?
So things that can happen on islands are also extremely relevant for coastal areas. The things that we have learned from restoration projects on islands can be applied to projects that happen on the mainland. Islands are like really, really important laboratories for new science in this way. So the other thing, like one of the main things that we've benefited from what am I trying to say? Something that conservation on islands has taught us is how important the connection between land and sea is. So when a project is undertaking environmental restoration, it cannot just focus on one specific ecosystem. They're all connected. When we're thinking about our restoration projects in places like Galveston Island State Park, we can also understand that whatever happens in that state park will also wash down into the Gulf, and then the effects will be felt there. Similarly, anything that happens in the Gulf will wash ashore. So we can see examples of this, like anytime something with oil happens, all of our marshlands and our near-shore ecosystems on land are affected. It affects nesting seabirds. And then another thing that is really important that we've learned from islands is the importance of these things we're calling connector species, so that species that move between these different ecosystems. Seabirds are an example of this. Sea turtles are an example. Seals. Anything that takes nutrients from one ecosystem and brings it to another one. So in the Gulf, we have fish populations that our seabirds feed on, and then they bring the nutrients from the sea onto the land. When they nest, their guano transfers those nutrients from the sea to the land, and that can help enrich our marshes and swamps and other things that we have here in the Gulf Coast. What else? Did that answer the question?
Yeah, no, I mean, so basically what I'm hearing is that islands, I mean, you use the word laboratory, right? So islands can serve as a laboratory for trying out different kind of tactics and techniques that can then be transported not only to the mainland, but specifically to coastal regions which share similarities, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, Bryn, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today about island conservation and all the great work that y'all have been up to. I really appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
That's our show for this week. If you have questions or ideas for what you'd like featured on Gulf Streams, leave a voicemail at 713-348-4081 or email us at westonT@rice.edu. A quick reminder that you can catch up on Gulf Streams anytime through our podcast, which is available on all major podcast platforms. If you enjoy the show, please like and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Gulf Streams is a co-production of KPFT Houston and Rice's Center for Environmental Studies and the Rice Sustainability Institute's Eco Studio. Produced by Weston Twardowski. Original music by Carter Dean. Research support provided by Sarah Tibrez and Antura Varma. Stay tuned for No Expectations with Marcus French here on KPFT Houston 90.1, Galveston 89.5 FM, and Huntsville 89.7 FM.